Hello and welcome to By the Book, the podcast for women in their second season, navigating reinvention, calling, business and the sacred transitions of midlife. I'm Johanne Hewlett, your host, and I'll be helping you to build your God-led business with faith, wisdom and confidence. So let's begin by the book. But before we go any further today, I forget this every week, I want to gently remind you what's happening this January and with our January Reset series and what it's about. So this season of returning to God's order is what we're focusing on, of learning to stand rightly before God again, so that when direction does come, it comes with peace rather than pressure. And in our last episode, we talked about drift, not as a failure or rebellion, but as a subtle misalignment that can happen over time, especially in midlife. Today, we take the next step forward because once we realise we may be misaligned rather than mistaken, a very natural question rises up. If God is reorientating me, what exactly is he calling me to do now? And this is where one of the most important distinctions for women in their second season comes in. And that's the difference between calling and assignment. One of the quiet burdens many Christian women carry into midlife is the fear that if things are changing, they must have misunderstood God earlier. And we think, did I miss it? Or did I get it wrong? Or was I disobedient? Or have I wasted time? And underneath those questions is often a deeper fear. What if the calling itself was wrong? But Scripture tells a very different story. And God is remarkably consistent in his purposes and remarkably flexible in his methods. When we confuse calling with assignment, we place an unbearable weight on every season of work, and we misinterpret change as a failure instead of a formation. So let's start by clarifying what calling is not. Calling is not a job title or a business idea or a ministry role or a platform, or a season-specific expression of work. Calling is deeper than output. Biblically speaking, calling speaks first to who you are before God, not what you produce for him or anyone else. Your calling, it's rooted in your identity and your relationship and your obedience and your faithfulness. And it doesn't expire when a role you've been given ends. It doesn't diminish when circumstances change, and it doesn't vanish when God asks you to lay something down. You see, calling is stable because it flows from God's character, not your capacity. An assignment, on the other hand, is seasonal. Assignments are the expressions of calling within time, place and capacity, and they're shaped by season, maturity, responsibility, readiness, and God's larger purposes. Assignments change not because God is uncertain, but because we are growing. And this is where midlife becomes a gift rather than a loss. You're no longer who you were at 25. You carry wisdom now. You carry discernment and restraint and depth you didn't have back then. Why wouldn't God assign differently now? So throughout Scripture, we see this pattern repeated. Moses was called to lead, but his assignments shifted from shepherd to liberator to lawgiver. And David was called as a king long before he was assigned the throne, and many of his formative assignments looked nothing like leadership. Paul was called to preach Christ, but his assignments changed dramatically through seasons of travel, imprisonment, and teaching. The calling remained, the assignment evolved, and midlife often marks a reassignment, not a withdrawal. Now, change can sometimes feel threatening when we've built our identity around the assignment rather than the calling. particularly as mothers. If I believe I am what I do, then when God changes what I do, you may feel a little raised. But if you believe I'm called by God, then when a change occurs in an assignment, it becomes an invitation rather than a loss. And this is why some women feel grief or fear or resistance when a season ends, even if they sense that God is initiating it. They're not resisting God, they're just protecting their identity. So here's a question that brings enormous peace when you're navigating change. What if God isn't removing my calling, but refining how I carry it? What if the shift you're sensing is not a downgrade, but a deepening? What if God is less interested in expanding your reach right now and more interested in strengthening your roots? Calling doesn't always lead to more. It sometimes leads to truer. Many women in their second season feel a strange tension, a sense of unfinished purpose, or alongside, a reluctance to build the same way again. And that tension, it's not confusion, it's discernment forming. You may no longer be willing to strive for visibility or hustle for affirmation or prove your usefulness. And that doesn't mean you're shrinking. It means you're being reassigned with wisdom. Let me say this clearly. Changing assignments does not mean you were wrong before, or that you failed or misunderstood God, or even that you wasted your obedience. God wastes nothing, not seasons, effort, not faithfulness. Often what felt like an ending was actually preparation for a truer expression of the same calling. So how do you hold this moment without rushing? You ask, who am I called to be before God, regardless of the output? Or what faithfulness looks like now, not then? Or what assignment fits the woman I'm becoming? And these are not questions to answer quickly, they're questions to carry prayerfully, which is exactly why this series is slow. As we continue this January Reset series, the next layer becomes crucial, because once we separate calling from assignment, another question emerges. If God is reshaping what I carry, what must be in place before I move forward again? In the next episode, we'll talk about order before output and why God consistently establishes authority, alignment and peace before he releases a new assignment. If you've ever felt pressure to act before you feel ready, that conversation will bring relief. I also want to share this with you in context, because much of what we're exploring today, the difference between calling and assignment and the grief that can come when God closes one chapter before explaining the next, sits at the heart of my book, By the Book. I wrote it for women like you in their second season who are still called, still capable, but increasingly unwilling to build in ways that bypass God's order of peace. And this isn't a book about chasing the next thing. It's about learning how to discern what God is actually asking of you now and how to remain faithful even when the assignment looks different to what you expected. Just visit my website, johewlettsauthor.com, to find out more. Until next time, go gently, go boldly, and go by the book.